The galaxy had reached a consensus. Humanity was understood, not fully respected perhaps, not admired, but catalogued, analyzed, and most importantly, dismissed. They were loud where silence was efficient, emotional where logic was safer, violent in ways that lacked elegance. To the elder civilizations of the stars, humanity was a species that burned brightly and briefly, a race that would either civilize itself into irrelevance or destroy itself before either outcome truly mattered. The official designation read, Species, Human Threat Assessment, Localized Strategic Value, Limited Long-Term Impact, Asterisk Negligible. No one questioned it. That was the mistake. Because on the day the galaxy faced extinction, humanity was the only species that did not ask whether survival was logical. They only asked who still needed help. The order of the galaxy, the Galactic Compact, had endured for over 80,000 years. It was not an empire. Empires fractured. It was not a union. Unions argued. The Compact was something far older and far colder, a self-correcting balance of power maintained by species that had optimized themselves past the need for hope. Wars were brief. Borders were stable. Extinction was managed. Civilizations that failed to adapt were documented, archived, and quietly replaced by those that did. Emotion had been engineered out of decision-making long ago. Survival was math. Against this backdrop, humanity arrived like static in a perfect signal. Their ships were inefficient, their designs inelegant, their communications filled with redundancies, emotion markers, and unnecessary metaphor. They argued in council sessions. They laughed during first contact briefings. They mourned losses that statistics deemed acceptable. The galaxy tolerated them. Barely. How the galaxy studied humanity was observed for exactly 147 standard cycles. That was more than generous. Analysts recorded everything. Their rapid technological growth, their internal conflicts, their tendency to pack bond with nearly anything. They fought wars over ideology. They fought wars over resources. They fought wars over principles that could not be quantified. This alarmed some observers, but the data always balanced out. Humans lost millions, then rebuilt. Humans destroyed ecosystems, then tried, clumsily, to repair them. They oscillated wildly between self-destruction and compassion. The final report concluded, humanity survives by accident, not design. The galaxy agreed. The coming of the impossible threat, the first warning, did not come as a fleet. It came as silence. An entire border system, 12 inhabited worlds, 4 major trade nexuses, billions of lives went dark between one standard transmission and the next. No debris, no energy spike, no survivors. Scouts sent to investigate vanished without signal or wreckage. The phenomenon did not move like a weapon. It advanced like an absence. The Compact named it the null, tied a placeholder term for something no one could yet define. Within weeks, optimized fleets were deployed. They did not return. Logic fails beautifully. The elder species responded exactly as they always had. Perfect simulations, predictive casualty curves, containment strategies that minimized loss. Every response assumed one thing, that survival followed rules. The null tide did not. Energy weapons passed through it. Gravitational weapons destabilized nearby space, but not the phenomenon itself. Artificial intelligences attempting to model it crashed under recursive impossibility. Whole battle groups were erased without resistance, without feedback, without meaning. And so the galaxy did what it always did when perfection failed. It retreated, worlds were abandoned, species were relocated. Entire civilizations were written off as losses within acceptable parameters. Survival percentages remained statistically favorable. Hope was not included in the calculations. Humanity is not consulted. Humans watched all of this from the margins. They were present in council chambers, but rarely addressed. Their fleets were small, their technology incompatible with most compact systems. When humanity requested threat data, they were given summaries. When they asked to participate in strategy sessions, they were deferred. One counselor summarized the prevailing opinion succinctly. This is not a conflict suited to emotional species. The humans did not argue, they listened. And then they began preparing anyway. What humans did instead, human space changed. Shipyards worked beyond rated capacity. Civilian transports were refitted into evacuation vessels. Medical ships outnumbered warships 3-1. Humans did not optimize for victory. They optimized for endurance. They trained crews knowing missions were likely one way. They stored messages, not tactical data, but recordings meant for families who might never see them again. Alien observers found this inefficient, wasteful, dangerously sentimental. No one stopped them. Why would they? Humanity was not expected to matter. The moment no one expected, when the null tide reached the outer defensive line of the compact, panic rippled across the galaxy. Containment had failed. Evacuation windows collapsed faster than predicted. Entire sectors faced erasure. Emergency council was convened. Debate raged, not over how to win, but how much could be saved. Then a human representative stood. She did not shout, she did not threaten. She simply said, "We'll stay." The chamber fell silent. A senior counselor tilted its head. "Stay." "Yes," the human replied. "Hold the line, buy time. Get civilians out." Calculations ran instantly. Human fleets would be annihilated. Their sacrifice would change nothing. The response was immediate. "Denied. Your species lacks the capability." The human nodded. "We know. Humanity volunteers anyway." Human ships moved without authorization. Not in defiance, in acceptance. They transmitted evacuation corridors. They positioned themselves between the null tide and retreating populations. Alien sensors registered the deployment and flagged it as irrelevant. One analyst summarized the event in a single line: "Human forces have chosen extinction." The galaxy turned away. Humanity did not. They held position. And for the first time since the null tide appeared, it slowed. The human fleet was not impressive. By compact standards, it was barely functional. Their ships were mismatched, old hulls flying beside new ones, civilian transports reinforced with armor plates welded on in haste, engines that burned hotter than recommended limits because humans had never trusted limits to begin with. They formed a line anyway, not a perfect formation, not a mathematically optimal one, just close enough that no ship stood alone. The null tide advanced. Sensors struggled to define it. It appeared as a distortion in reality, a region where matter, energy, and information simply ended. No debris, no radiation. Things entered it and were gone, erased so completely that even the concept of loss seemed too generous a word. Alien observers expected panic. They saw none. Human crews checked seals, rerouted power, recorded final messages. Then they waited. The first human ships vanished, not destroyed, removed. The compact sensors registered the loss as a statistical update. Casualty projections adjusted upward. Human survivability dropped to 0. And yet, the line did not collapse. Human ships closed the gaps left behind. They advanced engines. They held. "What are they doing?" a Lethari analyst whispered. "They are delaying," another replied. "Inefficiently," but the numbers told a different story. For the first time since its emergence, the null tide's expansion rate decreased. Not stopped. Slowed. A fractional change. Enough to evacuate 3 worlds. They do not retreat alone. Compact doctrine demanded withdrawal when loss thresholds were exceeded. Human doctrine did not exist. What existed instead was instinct. When a ship's engines failed, nearby vessels broke formation to shield it. When a medical frigate lost power, combat ships moved ahead of it instead of behind. When a civilian transport lagged, escorts reduced speed rather than abandon it. Alien observers flagged these actions as errors. Human crews called them not leaving people behind. Asterisk. The cost was staggering. The effect was undeniable. The null tide slowed further. A question NL as hours stretched into days, compact strategists reviewed data feeds they had never expected to study. Human communications, not commands, conversations. "We've got you, stay with me." "I know you're scared, so am I." These messages carried no tactical value, and yet ships that should have broken didn't. Crew performance exceeded predicted limits. Failure rates decreased the longer human units operated under extreme stress. A senior analyst finally voiced the unthinkable. "Fear is not degrading them." Silence followed. "Fear," the analyst continued slowly, "appears to be motivating them." They endure loss. Entire human squadrons vanished. The survivors did not disengage. They mourned. Then they filled the gaps. Alien observers expected collapse once losses exceeded cultural tolerance. They did not understand that human culture had been forged in loss. Human history was a record of extinction survived. Ice ages, plagues, wars that scorched continents. Each time humanity had lost millions and continued. Loss did not signal failure, it signaled continuation. The null tide advanced again. Humans pushed back, not with force, with presence. The change was subtle. The null tide shifted, not direction, attention. Sensors detected fluctuations, localized distortions that lingered where human ships clustered most densely. The phenomenon reacted. Alien command froze. Impossible, a viral logic node reported. The anomaly exhibits no awareness, and yet it avoided areas of highest human density, not because humans threatened it, but because interaction increased its instability. Human unpredictability disrupted whatever internal coherence the null tide possessed. The galaxy began to understand. The threat did not fear power, it struggled with resistance. Compact strategists finally authorized limited coordination. They provided humans with optimized engagement paths, suggested withdrawal points, casualty-minimizing formations. Human commanders acknowledged receipt, then ignored most of it. They chose routes that maximized civilian evacuation instead of fleet survival. They diverted resources to failing allies instead of reinforcing success. From a logical perspective, it was madness. From a human perspective, it was necessary. The null tide stalled entirely. Human losses reached catastrophic levels. Cities on Earth fell silent as casualty notifications stacked faster than they could be delivered. And still more ships launched, not because humans did not understand the cost, because they did. "Why do they keep coming?" an alien counselor demanded. A human liaison answered quietly. "Because if we stop, no one else will stay." The words rippled through the chamber. No one argued. They choose others. A breach opened. The null tide surged toward a densely populated sector, too fast for evacuation. Compact fleets calculated survival probabilities and withdrew. Human fleets did not. They accelerated into the breach. They did not expect to survive. They expected to hold. Alien sensors recorded the moment human signals went dark, one by one, then in waves. But the surge faltered. The breach collapsed. Behind it, billions escaped. The galaxy stared at the data. Human forces annihilated. Civilian survival rate unprecedented. The null tide receded, not defeated, not destroyed, contained, held in place by nothing more than human presence. For the first time, compact simulations failed to predict outcomes involving humans. They were not variables, they were disruptions. A viral node updated its assessment. Humanity does not seek survival, humanity enforces it. Stand that should have ended them. What remained of the human fleet regrouped. Barely. A final defensive line formed, thinner, weaker, outnumbered. Alien strategists knew the truth. This was where humanity would end. The null tide surged. Human ships powered forward, weapons overheated, hull integrity failed, and still they held. Alien observers waited for extinction. Instead, the null tide recoiled. The compact fleets watched from a distance. The null tide stalled, contained by human ships that should not have existed anymore. No reinforcement was possible. No rescue viable. Humanity stood alone at the edge of non-existence, and for the first time since the crisis began, the galaxy felt something unfamiliar. Not hope, not fear, responsibility. The galaxy waited for the end. Human signals flickered across the void, fractured, fading, held together by systems that should have failed hours ago. The null tide pressed against the final human line, not advancing, not retreating, testing. Compact observers realized something profoundly unsettling. The anomaly was no longer behaving like a force of nature. It was behaving like an opponent, and humanity was the only species it acknowledged. A truth the Compact could not escape. Emergency Council reconvened. For the first time in 80,000 years, the Compact did not debate. It listened. Human transmission logs filled the chamber, not tactical feeds, but final recordings. Messages to parents, to children, to strangers who might one day live because of what was happening now. A senior counselor spoke, voice unsteady. "They know they will not survive." A human liaison answered. "They know others will." The Compact understood the equation it had always ignored. Survival was not a number, it was a responsibility. When the galaxy finally followed, orders were issued, not optimized, not safe. Compact fleets moved back toward the line. They did not lead, they reinforced. Human ships burning, failing, barely holding cohesion, made room without comment. No triumph, no accusation, just space shared. The null tide reacted violently. Its structure destabilized under the combined presence of species that refused to abandon one another. For the first time, it fractured. Understanding the enemy as the anomaly broke apart, data poured in. The null tide was not a weapon, not an invasion. It was a consequence. A self-propagating absence created by civilizations that had optimized reality too far, collapsing dimensions through perfect efficiency until nothing remained. It erased complexity, emotion. Connection, humanity was incompatible with it. They were inefficient, messy, unpredictable, and impossible to fully erase. The final push human commanders coordinated the last stand, not to destroy the null tide, to close it. They flooded the fracture with signals, stories, memories, chaotic overlapping transmissions filled with contradiction and emotion. The anomaly convulsed. Reality reasserted itself. The null tide collapsed inward, sealed by the very complexity it could not process. Silence returned. Aftermath, the cost was beyond measure. Entire human fleets were gone. Billions lived because of them. The compact recorded losses. Then did something unprecedented. It memorialized a species, not for conquest, not for dominance, but for staying. What humanity asked for, the compact offered recompense. Territory, technology, permanent authority within the council. Human representatives declined most of it. They asked for evacuation protocols rewritten, for abandonment thresholds removed. For one rule to be added to compact law: no species faces extinction alone. The motion passed unanimously. The new classification, humanity's designation, was updated. Species, human threat assessment, existential, contextual, strategic value, irreplaceable long-term impact, defining an addendum followed. Humanity is not dangerous because of what it can destroy. Humanity is dangerous because of what it refuses to abandon. The lesson that endures long after the scars of the crisis faded: young species would ask why the galaxy changed, why evacuation fleets waited longer, why defense lines held even when logic said retreat. The answer was always the same: because once, when the universe began erasing itself, one species stood in the way, not because it believed it would win, but because someone had to stay. This is the day the galaxy discovered what humanity really means: not strength, not dominance, but the choice to remain when leaving would be easier.